So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this AJR Zoom event. My name is Michael Newman. I'm the Chief Executive of the AJR. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this gathering this afternoon, when we will be hearing on a subject which I think is very close to the hearts of not only the first generation members, but we have many second and even some third generation members. And of course, it's a subject which has gained some traction and gained some prominence in more recent years. We did our best to try and tie this as close to an anniversary. So we, of course, have just marked the 4th anniversary of the Brexit referendum, which is a very close milestone in recent history connected to this subject. Which is titled Reclaiming European Citizenship. Just a couple of housekeeping matters before we start. I've been saying for the last few minutes that we have muted everybody who's on the call today, and we're going to keep that there like that. Please don't unmute yourself in the meantime. This just saves on the background, having no background noise or interference whilst the speakers are delivering their presentation. There will be a chance later on in the event for people to ask questions or comments. I think it's worth stressing that as qualified as Simon and Ruby are, they are not people who can guide you specifically in applying for citizenship. So if you've come along with that in mind today and you want to ask them a question about the do's and don'ts and the how-tos, maybe don't ask, or they could perhaps give you some limited guidance, but that's not really what the event is about. It's a different matter. The event is being recorded in the recording that will be made available on our YouTube channel. Then you can just turn your camera off. And if you are on Twitter, then please do tweet to comment about this, because we have an active following there and it will be of interest to capture those thoughts there. And also, although this is a subject, as I mentioned, that's close to the hearts and the minds of the AJR historically, and I'll come and talk about that again in a minute or two. Of course, looking at the people on the tiles in front of me, most of you will of course be AJR members and know about the AJR's services and primary services, which is the delivery of the social welfare support for people. If you know of anybody that could benefit from that, from those services, then please do let us know, because we're very keen, especially now in lockdown, to make sure that we are delivering our mission and supporting those people that need that help, particularly at this difficult time. So this subject connects very closely and directly with the history of the AJR, because of course one of the things the AJR was involved in was supporting people to claim to apply for British citizenship post-war, and a number of our members became British in those immediate war years. And if you come full circle to what was almost 70 years after they became British, to the Brexit referendum, we were then giving some guidance to people on how to apply for to claim back citizenships that their parents or grandparents had. Predominantly for the AJR, this is to do with German and Austrian and some Czech and some Polish. But of course, the project that we're going to hear about today is across the whole EU, the EU 27, as it's described on the website. And I think it's something which I think a lot of us have given some thought to, and perhaps some of you have even filled out the questionnaire that I'm sure Ruby and Simon are going to talk a bit about later in the event. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the two speakers today, Simon Albert and Ruby Ziegler. I'm just going to embarrass them by giving a quick biography introduction. So Dr. Ruby Ziegler is the Associate Professor in international refugee law at the University of Reading School of Law, an associate academic fellow of the Honourable Society of the Inner Temple, research associate of the Refuge Studies Centre, University of Oxford. He's on the advisory council of René Cassin, an organisation specialising in the promotion of human rights, and the author of Voting Rights of Refugees. Simon is a lawyer based in London, practicing EU and UK competition law, so he seems ideally qualified for this subject. He was actually born in Frankfurt in Germany, and as you would expect from the speakers today, they've both put their money where their mouths are, and that they have reclaimed the citizenship of an EU country. In Ruvi's case, it's German, through Article 116, which I know will mean something to people on the call today. And in Simon's case, Czech nationality that he restored for himself and a number of his relatives. So delighted to hand the floor to Simon and Ruvi. We're delighted to be able to stage this event. This was one of the events that we had planned for our second generation conference, which we had planned for April just past, but we sadly had to postpone. So we are reviving it here in a virtual sense. I'm tempted to say that the audience will be as big as the one that would have come to the event in April, perhaps even bigger. But either way, it's a great pleasure to work with you guys and to present this information to them. So I'll hand the floor to you two, and then I'll come back a bit later and we'll just try and see how we can frame some audience participation. Simon, Ruvi, over to you guys.
Much, Michael. I can just see the poll, which is appearing on screen. So I'm hoping everyone might be able to take advantage of the set of questions there and answer them. But first of all, may I just say to all of the AJR team members, thank you so much for hosting us today, for arranging this event, and working with us for more than a year on this project, because we first got in touch with you in the early part of 2019, I believe. We're extremely grateful for your time and the opportunity to speak to the membership now and hopefully in future as well. I can see that there's 138 people so far participating, so which is an extraordinary number. So thank you to the audience as well. Ruvi?
Yes, so should I take over? Brilliant. Not take over in so any hostile and permanent member way. So I want to extend my thanks as well to the AJR team and to Michael for chairing this, and to my partner in crime, Simon. And I'll talk a little bit first but just about what it is that we want to be doing for the next half an hour or so, which is to outline the project, the impetus for having this project in the first place, and then we want to personalize this a little bit to explain to you our personal motivations for this, so Simon's story and as you were mine. And we then want to walk you through that Jewish Historical Society of England's website where the project is hosted, and to encourage those of you who've not yet looked at it and not yet contributed to it to consider doing so. And then we'll leave plenty of time for discussion and questions. So fear not. What I will be doing is I'll be sharing my screen, so you thankfully don't have to look at me for very long. First for a short presentation at the start, and then later on in discussion I'll come back and show you a little bit of statistics derived from the contributions we've already had to our website project, which are in the order of 50 people. So it actually already gives quite a good indication of some of the interesting trends. So let me start off by contextualizing this project. So the aim of the project really is to what we describe as collate British Jews' reflections on applying to reclaim an ancestral citizenship of an EU country. And so we're interested in the motivations for people doing that, in the dilemmas they face on whether to do it or not, and in the challenges they face as they go about doing it. And when we go later through the website, Simon will show you, we have a whole set of questions that would identify people's community membership, relations to Israel, and various other issues that I think would be relevant for that discussion. I see that some people are raising hands. Unless it is a clarification, or unless I can't be heard or something, perhaps we can wait with questions until that first phase of discussion goes on. So
yeah,
so apologies for that.
Ruby, just to try to interrupt you, I'm just thinking if people have done that by accident, then that's one thing. If people have done it because they have a question, I totally agree. And also to use the, is there a chat? Where was the chat?
Sorry, let me just jump in. There doesn't appear to be a chat.
No, there doesn't, does there?
No.
Okay, so people will have to, if you can save your question, yeah, like that, wave, put your hand up, and we'll get to you. But that will come after the
initial phase.
Section. Yeah. Sorry, Rick.
Okay. No, that's all right. Thank you. Yeah, I actually also noticed now that there isn't a chat. So yeah, so just hold fire, as you were. So yeah, so all the motivations, dilemmas, and challenges, and our aim is, once we have a sizable database, we've teamed up with quite a few other academics and are keen to interest others in what we hope will result in a special edition of Transactions, which is a journal that the Jewish Historical Society of England has been publishing for many, many years, and will be devoted to analyzing different aspects of this project. And this is the website which we will flag and show you in a multiplicity of ways, including on t-shirts. Which Simon might be able to point you in directions if you were to wish to obtain one. And so the scope of the project, which is really that poll that our AGR colleagues have kindly launched, we're interested in people who are considering or considered, or as children have considered applying for EU citizenship through their ancestry and decided not to do so, or found out they can't because they're not eligible, in those who applied and whose applications are pending, in those whose applications were rejected, although we recognize that might be painful to kind of tell that story on a website, but if you wish to, then I think that would add a really important dimension, and of course in those who applied and whose applications were successful. And one indication to suggest that what we're doing here is not some academic in the pejorative sense of the word project is just this graph demonstrating, or not graph, but table demonstrating the number of applications for restoration of German nationality through Article 116 of the German Basic Law by UK residents. And you can note the number of people applying in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015 has been in the dozens. And 2016, and in fact, almost all of that number applies to the latter half of 2016 after the 23rd of June 2016 referendum. And ever since then, we are in the order of 1,500 people each year applying to restore German nationality. And this is just people who are British and doing it from Britain through Article 116. This is an extraordinary change, which the German embassies also recognize, and we might later on get into some discussions as to the specific dilemmas around reacquiring German nationality. But it suggests that there is something happening here, and as Simon has, sorry,
Ruby, sorry to break in. On that table for the 2019, the number there is 1414 for the period January to September.
Yeah.
In fact, the full year figure from the German embassy that they've provided me with is 1,737.
Yeah.
And I've also requested the figure for 2020. So we're probably looking at around about 6,000 people since 2016 inclusive.
So since the referendum, yeah, no, exactly. So it's a very, very sizable sample, and of course, many of them might be keen to take part in the project. And so, as Simon has said, the initial kind of thinking, this has been a year and a half in the making in some ways, was as a result of things that I will come to, decided as part of my Limud spiel in 2018 in festival to give a session entitled Citizen of Nowhere, the Brexit Fallout and My Jewish Identity. Someone heard me give that talk and thought, why don't we try to make some sort of a academic or research project out of that, leading last year in December to the launch of our project at the Wiener Holocaust Library in a panel, and indeed to the launch of the Jewish Historical Society of England website. And when I say I came to Limud and feelings as something I want to explore, it was, of course, against the background of the 2016 referendum, which was reversing a trend ever since the creation of the European Economic Community initially, of enlargement of the European Union step by step in 7 tranches, which, as we all know, the referendum has reversed. And after that referendum, in the Conservative Party conference, the then Prime Minister Theresa May has said that if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you are a citizen of nowhere. And to me, that prompted, I think, quite fundamental questions about identity and the way the referendum and its ramifications for people's identity as British and European has been interrupted, but also the extent to which people in Britain have multifaceted identities, that they can be British and something else as well. And within that, the specific situation, dilemmas, challenges, and thoughts of the Jewish community in Britain. So that Theresa May statement very much to me read like a bit of a relic from the past, and that past is the 1930 Convention on Certain Questions Relating to the Conflict of Nationality Law. So in 1930, the global international system thought that it is in the general interest of the international community that all its members should recognize that every person should have a nationality, but should have one nationality only. Now, the context of our project, of course, is a context of a project where people who have one nationality seek to have at least one other nationality. And within the context of the United Kingdom and the Brexit referendum, the clearest example of a non-Jewish, largely contingent where that is the case is that of Northern Ireland. The idea that actually in Northern Ireland, the British passport and the Irish passport go quite literally hand in hand, because the Good Friday Agreement, which of course the withdrawal agreement has cemented further, recognizes what it determines to be the birthright of all the people of Northern Ireland to identify themselves and be accepted as Irish or British or both if they so may choose. So for the people of Northern Ireland, the idea that national identity and citizenship flows from it is indeed a matter of choice. And that choice isn't binary because they can choose to be both. And that to me tells a different story than the story that perhaps that Theresa May quote indicates. But that Theresa May quote perhaps indicates that there was something about the referendum that does raise a fundamental fault line in perhaps the British polity when it comes to identity. So a week after the referendum, on the 30th of June 2016, The Economist had this as what it defined as the new divide in politics. a divide not based on the classic left-right, but a divide based largely on approaches to issues around immigration. And that, to some extent, were then confirmed or affirmed by a poll by Lord Ashcroft, the main Tory party pollster in the David Cameron years, where it asked a very large size of the population in Britain after the referendum to answer what it believes to be their position in respect of these statements. Is something a force for good or is something a force for ill? And trying to tie that answer to the way they voted in the referendum. And the striking thing about this table that you see is that when it comes to issues like capitalism, so again, the classic left-right divide, if you will, there was actually no correlation at all between whether people voted Leave or Remain and their position as to whether capitalism is a force for good or for ill. But when it came to immigration and multiculturalism, the two perhaps predominant features when one thinks about multiple or multifaceted identities, there was a very strong correlation. So of people who took the view that immigration is a force for ill, there was a 4-to-1 ratio for Leave. For people who took the view that immigration is a force for good, it was the reverse. And pretty much in tandem with the publication of this poll came out a book by David Goodhart called The Road to Somewhere. And what David Goodhart tried to do in The Road to Somewhere is he tried to suggest that there are two great subterranean value blocks of modern Britain that the referendum to some extent brings to the surface. What he defines, and again, this is a very contested framework, but I think it is one that we want to try and think and bear in mind when we go into this project, is a division between what he calls anywheres and somewheres. He calls anywheres as those who are free of nostalgia, egalitarian, meritocratic in attitudes to race, sexuality, and gender, and light in their attachment to larger group identities, including national ones. Somewheres, on the other hand, have an unease with the modern world, a nostalgic sense that change is lost, and a strong belief that it is the job of British leaders to put the interest of Britons first. And he goes on to say that wanting to turn the clock back is not a foolish instinct for those who feel non-material aspects of life really were better in the past, and that a hyper-individualistic, what he calls London-based Britain, doesn't correspond to the way most people live or want to live. And so against that background, in my thinking about issues around reclaiming European citizenship, and again, this trend that started from 2016, I think raises some general dilemmas and motivations and challenges, and some Jewish-specific ones. And in this project, in a sense, what we're trying to tease out are the ways in which there are those two dimensions that apply to members of the British Jewish communities. So there seem to be two main, or seem to Simon and myself, be two main motivations that have come through for people who haven't applied for another European citizenship prior to 2016 and have done so since. The first is the Brexit referendum itself, and the idea that British citizens, as of the 31st of January this year, are no longer EU citizens, no longer, as of the end of transition at the end of this year, will no longer enjoy EU citizenship rights in all their forms, and whatever rights they will have will be dependent on whatever agreement is or isn't reached with the European Union. And the second was at least a strong sense amongst many members of the communities that there is a more worrying, perhaps, resurgence of anti-Semitism, and that that kind of concept of having a packed suitcase by the door, ready to leave the house at any point. So those are some of the motivations. Then what we want to do is look at some of the general challenges and the Jewish specific challenges. So there are some general challenges when one goes about acquiring another citizenship. The first is it even permitted to have another citizenship, to have dual or plural citizenship? And within that, is there an exception made for Jews under the various reclaiming procedures that are not made for others? So if we look at the data around the world, out of 175 countries, only 81 in the world actually have full acceptance of dual or multiple citizenship. In 33, there are no routes to that at all. And in 31 of them, it is available for immigrants only to retain another citizenship. And in 30, it's available for immigrants only. So the question of dual citizenship is by no means settled around the world. And even within the European Union, there are 10 countries where, generally speaking, dual citizenship is not tolerated. So that's a big challenge. The second is the process costly? Is it cumbersome? Is it lengthy? So to what extent can you instrumentally go about this process quite easily? And the third is, are there general residence or language or civics requirements? And are those waived in the pathways for reclaiming citizenship for Jews, even if they are generally expected of those who naturalize as residents in their countries? And then there are, and this is where I end, two, I think, specific Jewish dilemmas. The first is this quote unquote dual loyalty charge. Can you be British and? Now, this may be a challenge for anyone who is British and seeks another nationality, as the Theresa May quote suggests. But I want to argue, or I think there is a case to be made that seems to be a particularly thorny issue for the Jewish community and for Jews. And we hear it often in the context of dual loyalty between countries and Israel, but it may be, and as the negotiations with the European Union proceed or do not, it may be an issue that also arises in the context of Britain and another European country. And then there is a second fundamental challenge, and that is, to what extent does that past persecution that often is the basis on which Jews are able to reclaim their citizenship, because they were driven out from those countries, and the German Basic Law very explicitly refers to the term persecution. Does that make people think again, or think about whether they want to go about reclaiming citizenship? And is there a difference here? And this is why our project, as Michael has suggested, looks across the whole of the European Union. Is there a difference between those who reclaim Spanish and Portuguese citizenships, for instance, based on past persecution of Jews 528 years ago in 1492, as opposed to those who were persecuted just a couple of generations ago in Central and Eastern Europe? Is there a difference that we can pick up from the data? So I think this is what I wanted to say at this stage, and I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I think with that, I want to hand over to make this, as I said, a bit more personal, to Simon, to perhaps talk about what motivated him to be involved in the project and his own personal story. So Simon, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ruvi. A wonderful presentation, and I hope everyone can hear me okay with the microphone. So I just thought I might make the whole thing a little bit more tangible. I hope people can see on screen if it's coming through okay. This is my Czech passport, and I spent 2 years from 2017 going through the bureaucratic process to reinstate my grandparents' former Czechoslovak citizenship. That was prompted, I mean, the practical possibility of doing so was prompted by going to see my aunt in Vienna. She happens to live there, and going through a shoebox full of my late grandparents' passports, which remained collected in that box. And most of them were British ones. but in fact, she kept in that box her parents' original Czechoslovak passports from the 1930s, on which they escaped with proper British visas from Prague in 1939 on different dates. So that my grandfather came here first and met my grandmother on a subsequent train at Liverpool Street Station on the platform. And in fact, my nationality derives from my paternal grandparents, but in fact, my maternal grandfather also came from Prague. So 3 of my 4 grandparents came from Prague in 1939. And when I saw those passports in that shoebox, and the fact that it was indisputable evidence of their citizenship, that was in 2017. That was a year after the referendum. I always knew where my grandparents came from. I didn't realize we actually had their passports. And so I wrote off to the consulate and said, here are the passports, photocopies of them, and what do you need from me? And then I started the process from there. And they never disputed the eligibility of myself and the rest of my family to reinstate the nationality, because it was there in black and white, amongst plenty of other documentation. And it wasn't emotionally difficult for me to do so, in the sense that I know for many of the people on this call, and for others out there, so for instance, anyone who watched the BBC documentary featuring Julia Neuberger and 2 others a couple of years back, it illustrated very strongly the very tough dilemmas involved for some people on thinking about reinstating their German or possibly Austrian nationality, even where they can do so. So in that documentary, 2 of them went ahead, 1 of them did not do so. The same historical reasons didn't quite exist in relation to the Czech Republic, so I felt no inhibitions in doing so, and neither did my family. And so we now have 7 of those passports in place, to the point where our cousins in Israel are doing the same, but not because of Brexit. So when Ruvi put on this talk, I knew nothing about it at Limud, but it was a real meeting of minds, and we spoke afterwards. It turned out he holds a German passport from his family ancestry, and on top of growing up in Israel, and I now hold British and Czech. And we wanted to put a project together because we thought that if so many hundreds, and now it seems thousands of people are doing this, and it's not just the German route. We know that there are other Central European countries that people are applying for. And we also know, and we never want to neglect in this story, the Sephardi angle, which Ruvi has already alluded to. We know from BBC reporting that hundreds of people have applied for Portuguese passports, Spanish as well. Spain is slightly harder because there's a language test. Portugal does not currently insist on a language test. So it's a story of the entire British Jewish community and their various forms of ancestry and how they're relating back to them. And we felt that it was a very, very odd story in terms of a community that has spent many decades, if not centuries, trying to integrate as best as possible into national life in this country. And now, for a variety of reasons, it is almost turning that 180 degrees and seeking out the nationality of countries from which their families fled in extremely trying circumstances, and in terms of the 20th century, lethal genocidal persecution within living memory, and how odd it was for people to be reconsidering their identity in that way, and that it would be fascinating to try and capture that story as best as we could. And we have been delighted to work with the AJR from a very early stage, and even more delighted to be able to team up with the Jewish Historical Society of England and place our questionnaire on their wonderful new website. And later in this talk, we may come to the point where we show the different aspects of that website and explain some of the endorsements and publicity that we've had for it. So perhaps at that point, I might hand back to Ruvi.
Yeah, thanks very much, Simon. So I'll just briefly tell my story, as you were. Then I want to show you just a few statistics that arise from the website submissions that we've had thus far. And then Simon perhaps can walk us through the website, at which point we'll open it up for your questions and discussion. So start thinking about issues you wish to raise. So yeah, my story is quite an perhaps an interesting, not that unusual Israeli one, which is that I grew up in Israel to parents. My mom was born in Israel, or in British Mandate Palestine, but her parents, my late maternal grandparents, fled Germany in January 1939. So after Kristallnacht, just before the white paper was published, through Switzerland, and as a result, there was a German route available. My father, who's thankfully still alive, is himself a Holocaust survivor who grew up, was born in 1939, so grew up in what is today Ukraine, Lviv, and was then Lvov in Poland. And that, by the way, could have been a potential route maybe as well, but the German route was a very straightforward one in the context of Article 116. And so I actually pursued my German nationality, not in the context of what this project would necessarily uncover, because I was not British yet. I was an Israeli seeking to make use of precisely the sort of thing I think many Brits will now see that they're about to lose, which is the various European Union related rights to study first at Oxford and then to work, which is what I ended up doing at the University of Reading. I am now also British. I've actually received my my German passport is here, and maybe as a prop I should have also had my British passport, which quite incidentally has the issue date of the 29th of March 2019. For those of you with long memory, you will recall that this was the original Brexit date, and actually soon thereafter passports ceased to have the title European Union on them. So my British passport still says European Union and is valid for 10 years. So there you have it. Maybe when I come to renew it, maybe it will still say that. Let me just show you a few statistics that I've derived from the roughly 50 submissions that we've thus had to the website, and then Simon can take you through some other to take you through the website itself. So the first is, what are the nationalities that are thought by those who have filled our survey? So as you can see, there is a very sizable, nearly half of the applications of those 50 are of people who thought German nationality. The second biggest grouping is actually Portuguese, and then we've got Austrian and Spanish. So to some extent, this confirms our thinking that those are the two kind of main routes, as you were. You could say, think about it as the most recent persecution and the most distant one. And there are all these gradations between. Then we've got the question of which is the non-UK nationalities that people who apply currently hold. So many of the people who filled our questionnaire only have British nationality at the moment, but some have another. And so of those who have another, and those probably are many of whom are the ones who applied and were successful, have German nationality. But there's a really interesting spread which stretches all the way to New Zealand and South Africa. So quite an interesting mix, and perhaps shows the diversity and breadth of the British Jewish community. The third kind of interesting point which thought to look at is the length of UK residence. So are we talking about people like myself who have actually arrived in the UK? I am in that bracket of the 5 to 30 years, so I've now lived in the UK for 13 years. Or are we talking primarily about people who have been here for very, very long? And if you match that, and I'll show you in a minute, the age groupings, the vast majority of people who have filled our questionnaire are people who were born in Britain, or at least have lived in Britain throughout their lives, because the 30 to 35 actually matches to the vast majority of our applicants who are within that age grouping. So only very few people are new arrivals to the UK who are now seeking another European nationality, and not that many are in the over 75 group, but that represents the age grouping of those who fill the questionnaire. So if we look at the, let me just actually go to that final slide first. So the applications by age, most of our applicants are in the 45, we don't have under 18s, understandably, who filled the questionnaire. So in the 45 to 64 bracket and in the 18 to 45. And then the final kind of interesting data is where people live in the UK. And again, perhaps that is a representation of the British Jewish community as well. But if you factor in not just London, but the various London main suburbs, including Pinner and Borehamwood, you get to nearly 2/3 of our applicants. Those other are all single applications. So we've had one application from Brighton and one application from Leeds and the like. So most of our applicants at the moment have come from London. Now, this is obviously 50 applications or 50 questionnaires. We can already attest by the data we have about German applications that there are many, many, many more people out there, including many people on this call, potentially, who could fill the questionnaire. And I think that is a very good segue to turn over to Simon to show you how you can do it.
Thank you. I'm now going to share the screen, and I hope it works. Can everyone see this? Ruvi, can you see the website?
Yes, absolutely.
So you can see here the main address. So you go to the jhse.org website, and then you click on resources, and then it appears under passport system. So that's what you simply need to do. If I hover there for a moment, you can see the full address in the bar here. But the way to get to the questionnaire is here. The title of the project is "My Father Was a Wandering European," which is an allusion to the phrase in the Haggadah for Pesach about being a wandering Aramean. But in this case, because it's about the European Union, it's a wandering European. And just for ironic purposes, we've asked triple loyalties in Brexit Britain: British, Jewish, European, ? So we just scroll down gently here, and there's some welcome wording here. And you'll see here on the left a photo from Daniel Finkelstein, who is one of our early and vocal supporters. And he's given us this welcome message here because he is right behind the project, which he thinks is a great initiative and very important. Now, Danny Finkelstein is important in a number of ways. Obviously, he is a peer of the realm. He is a columnist on the Times and Jewish Chronicle newspapers. He is the grandson of Dr. Alfred Wiener, who founded the Wiener Library, and hence the choice of venue for the launch of the project in December. He also wrote a column about this very subject a few years ago, before we started the project, about his British nationality and the fact that he felt he could apply for German or other EU nationality, but because he was particularly proud of being British and thought it was a question of being one nationality at a time, he himself did not wish to apply. And there may be many people on this call who feel that way. And there's certainly people that we've spoken to in the past about this project who feel this way. And you'll see in the categories here, there may be people who feel that way, but we're nonetheless very keen to hear from them where they are eligible to apply, but like Danny Finkelstein, do not wish to do so. The irony in Danny's case is that he wrote about his wife and children who were minded to apply through his wife's ancestry. So we've inserted here his photo and the categories of people that Ruvi has already run through, which we think captures the whole spectrum of opinion out there. And here we have links to the publicity that we have already enjoyed. Here in Britain, within the Jewish Chronicle, where we had a double-page feature spread in December 2019. And also in a US Jewish magazine called Tablet Magazine, which talked about our launch event. Below, we have a section which hopefully covers many of the questions which people might have about the project. So there are a number of frequently asked questions which we've tried to cover here. You'll see that there's a drop-down menu with the answers. And we've also taken very specific advice on the data protection aspects of the project. People have asked us about this in the past. So we went to the head of data protection law at Mishkon Derea, and he guided us on how to structure the website and the consent wording that people might agree to. Scrolling further down, we just say here that there's no word limit, so people are more than welcome to write however much or as little as they might want to, or indeed answer some questions but not others, depending on what they're happy asking, talking about. So we ask for people's names, their age or the bracket in which they fall, roughly where they live in the UK, how long they have lived here, the languages that they may speak, including Hebrew and or Yiddish, their what they do for a living, and their educational qualifications. And this goes to some of the charts that Ruvi has already shown, that we're trying to get a picture of the respondents to the survey and how that breaks down across society and the Jewish community in particular. The citizenships that they may hold at this moment, so for many people that may just be UK, the ones that they have sought. And we wanted to make it very clear from the outset, and hopefully we've been able to stress that already in this conversation. It's not simply about stereotypical Central European nationalities, be that German or Austrian, or in my case, and others, Czech. It's a lot more exotic than that. We've talked about Spain and Portugal. There'll be others from France, Italy, Hungary. There are 27 options out there and many, many different stories that we would be extremely keen to hear about. So the next question is, when did you decide to seek those citizenships? So some people, as the numbers from the German embassy indicate, may have only decided to do so post-2016. There may be others who have held it all their lives, or from a much earlier part of their life. And then here there is a box where people can answer what made them decide to apply for this other nationality, what makes them eligible for that, what their family history may be. So in the case of Ruvi and myself, it derives from our grandparents and parents. And here we give people the option to attach potentially PDF documents that they may have written elsewhere, or indeed photos of relevant individuals from their family trees. This is a key box here, what people think and feel about how it was for them applying for this nationality, but how difficult a dilemma it was for them, how they now identify themselves, and how they may feel their identity has changed via the nationality process. how easy or difficult it was to get this new nationality or new old nationality. In my case, it took 2 years, but that was just because we were dealing with 7 different applications, and there was a lot of paperwork to get through. And this is also an extremely interesting question: what people wish to do about that extra purple passport, like I'm showing on screen here. Is it something that they're going to simply keep in a drawer in their desk? Is it something they're going to use just to go on holiday? Or is it something that they wish to use in a more fundamental fashion? As we alluded to earlier, the next question basically refers to the Jews and packed suitcases kind of thinking. And here we're trying to understand the religious affiliation of the people answering our questionnaire, because one of the most interesting phenomena that we are seeing is that there are people applying for another nationality, both within the community in the technical sense of the word, that they have a synagogue affiliation, others who do not, and others who may not have even identified actively as being overtly Jewish in their own lives, but because of their particular ancestry are eligible to do so. So we're capturing a whole spectrum of individuals, and that's extremely interesting as well. So we're giving people in the next question the opportunity to describe their Jewish identity, or indeed not having a Jewish identity particularly at all. Capturing more aspects of that identity in terms of visiting Israel, making Aliyah, and lastly, the opportunity to dedicate their submission in memory of any particular relatives, because that goes to the emotional point of this exercise. It's not merely a dry academic exercise or a legal exercise. It's about real people living now and in the past. And the fact of people's ancestry gives them the opportunity legally, administratively now to apply for one of these passports, but they're very real. There's very real human interest, if I can express it that way, in the phenomenon. And we ask here about email addresses in terms of further research and contact. And this is the privacy notice that we've installed following the advice that we have received from a legal expert. Here you can upload a file. Here's your consent box, and then this is the submit button. And you can see here that the JHSE is a registered charity, and they have actually been in existence, as you can see from their logo, since 1893, and have featured some very distinguished Jewish historians and thinkers. One of their former presidents was Isaiah Berlin, and we stand therefore on the shoulders of giants, to coin a phrase, and we very much wish to build on that. One point of information is that the questionnaire is open. Initially, it was open till the end of 2020, but given the extreme circumstances that we're all living through these days, we've opened it till the end of 2021. So there's a whole 18 months from today in which people can respond to the questionnaire. And we very much hope that many hundreds of people will do so, if not thousands. That would be our ambition. So I'll leave it there for now. Ruvi, did you want to add anything to that, or indeed Michael Newman?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point for us to turn to our co-listeners, participants, and see what sort of questions and comments they might have. So maybe I'll hand over to Michael to regulate that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much. That was it's a fascinating project, and it's always great to have personal stories to humanize what could be a legal, as you said, a legal or dry process. It's always fascinating, and indeed the AJR Journal has covered a couple of these stories for the last few years, couple of months, about people going on that journey, wrestling with their challenges, some of which you've outlined here, and obviously outlined in the questions on the website, as people make these quite tough decisions. And I know we're going to do our bit to help promote the website as well. And just so I put my money where my mouth is, I actually completed it earlier. So I may be the 50th person who
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
rounded up the numbers for you. And I would encourage people on the call to do so. Just before we open it up, we're going to have to try and think about how best to do this as well. I did want to mention one aspect, was one trend related to this recently. I mean, a lot of the statistics you presented there, of course, were heavily skewed in favor of the applicants from Germany, whether they're successful or not. And we've worked very closely with, as well as the German embassy, but also other people who have tried to make advances to improve the access to the procedures for people to apply for their citizenships. As some of you on the call will know, that there were some limitations to the main restoration process for German citizenship, this so-called Article 116. I know Ruby was successful through it, but there are legal limitations to it, and a group of people who have worked very closely to I suppose work with the authorities in Germany and with us to help find a way around those limitations are actually on the call, because there are now two procedures. Well, were two procedures through which people can reclaim German citizenship. One is the Article 116, and the other is something called STAG 14. And I just thought it would be helpful if I could unmute a couple of colleagues on the call. We have Felix Couchman and Nick Kortman, who are from this Article 116 exclusion group. I just thought maybe for Nick or Felix, literally for a couple of minutes, if you could just update the progress that you've made. And also just to add that being part of this group, I've seen in recent weeks a number of people who have applied under this alternative simplified procedure, this STAG 14. They have confirmed that they have been granted their citizenship, which is a significant outcome for them, considering that a couple of years ago they of course were stuck being ineligible under the 116. So let me unmute Nick.
And just before that, Ruby noted in the last couple of days there's been a judgment from the German Constitutional Court on this very topic.
Yes, I wanted to.
He's more qualified to speak on.
Yeah, so I wanted to them to cover that as well. So.
Okay, can I just interrupt 1 second? Simon, can you stop sharing your screen so we can see who's speaking, please? Thank you.
Okay. For some reason, I can't unmute Felix and Isabel, but Nick, you should be unmuted.
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So I should just quickly, I don't know whether you're the official deputy to the exclusion group, but you've certainly been one of the main driving forces of a group that Felix and in fact his wife Isabel convened and put together. But Nick, perhaps you could just touch briefly on that court case and maybe developments with STAG as well.
Sure. Well, I guess it's probably apparent to lots of people in the call what the STAG 14 path was established to do. So there were restrictions on who could actually use the constitutional article to renaturalize, based generally on three things: kind of the gender of your ancestor and when you were born, the way in which your ancestors lost their citizenship. So was it removed by the Nazis through a kind of specific administrative act of expatriation or denaturalization? And if that didn't happen, you were normally excluded from the constitutional article. Or third, there was another subgroup of German-speaking Jews who were excluded from mass naturalizations of German speakers in the areas which the Nazis occupied during the Second World War. And the decrees, which Stag 14 is actually a provision which allows for discretionary naturalization of any non-German living abroad. The path that we are using through Stag 14 actually has been established by some decrees that came into force last August. And those opened up ways for all of those excluded groups to naturalize, with the exception, partial exception, of people adopted before 1977. And another group that's still excluded would be Jews who were born and grew up in Germany before 1933 without German citizenship. That's a group which is still kind of not actually included in the provisions which the German government has produced. What the Constitutional Court ruling from last week has done, and sorry, Ruby, if I get something wrong or you want to, change this or add something, please go ahead. But what that's kind of done is it's thrown away a procedure which was introduced by the Federal Administrative Court in 1983, which for the first time said, when it comes to deciding which descendants are allowed to naturalize to the constitutional article, you have to see, would those descendants have acquired German citizenship through descent according to the citizenship laws in force at the time of their birth? Which is a very long roundabout way of saying, if you were born in wedlock to a persecuted denaturalized German woman before 1953 who was married to a non-German man, you were cut out. If you were married before 1993, if you were born before 1993 out of wedlock to a persecuted man, then you were also out. The Constitutional Court said the wording of the article doesn't actually allow for this very restrictive reading, so we're going to chuck that out the window. And they did that in reference to a woman who was born in 1967 out of wedlock to a persecuted German Jew who'd been expatriated during the Second World War period. It's unclear yet what the broader consequences of that ruling are going to be. From my experience in speaking to different authorities here in Germany, they aren't really sure whether this simply means people born before 1993 out of wedlock to men can use the constitutional article. I would argue it also includes people born before 1953 in wedlock to women should be able to use it, which kind of tears up a lot of these exclusions that relate to the issue of when you were born, right? But it doesn't actually affect the other exclusion grounds, which are how did your ancestors lose their citizenship, or were your ancestors German-speaking Jews from the military occupied territories? But it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of proceed with this, especially because already there is this really big problem in the Bundesverwaltungsamt, which is the German authority that is tasked with processing naturalization applications. In that there's a huge backlog of Article 116 applications, such that new applications only begin to be processed 24 months after they arrive in the Bundesverwaltungsamt. While the government put a lot of money into creating positions that would process the new Stag 14 applications, because they knew that it would be a big kind of public relations disaster if they come out with this set of new decrees to try and make up for a big mistake that they'd maintained themselves over decades. And then it takes years and years for people to be naturalized. So it's going to create a huge kind of administrative quandary in that people who've applied now under Stag 14 who might be eligible under 116 might have to change their application, which might lead to a 2-year delay of the processing time and all these other things. So there's a lot of stuff really which this Constitutional Court ruling is going to kick into action that needs to be processed.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nick. I think it's just interesting to note alongside that the Stag 14 application, which only, as you say, only came around from last September's ruling, that it's taken, well, that's like 9 months for some of those applications, quite a number of them, to be processed. And given this is discretionary, the obvious point to say there is this is a much shorter process than some of the Article 116, which were taking up to 18 months or 2 years.
Well, that's because
so
that's
it's an interesting.
I think that's because it's because those applications begin to be processed as soon as they arrive in the Bundesverwaltungsamt since October, September. Whereas with Article 116 applications, they have a different set of people who are tasked with processing them, which leads to this really big delay.
Sure. and we should add here that because I can see from the tiles in front of me a number of people who have the Austrian heritage, that the application process starts in this coming September. The procedure opens on the 1st of September, and there's some guidance on the Austrian Embassy website. Ruby, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about what Nick just said. Otherwise, we can maybe move on.
Yeah, I think that was very succinct and accurate, so as far as I'm aware.
Okay. In that case, let's use this as an opportunity to maybe hear from some of you who are on the call. I think really two parts. It's just interesting if people have done this, or what their thoughts or their motivations. And particularly come back to something that you both mentioned earlier about the motivations for people, and how we can square the motivations, particularly for our group of people, with those of Sephardi's heritage, perhaps, because in the sense of our members, this is a very recent and raw and near subject that they have emotional, psychological connections to. I think for something that happened hundreds of years ago, I'm wondering if the motivations are slightly different for people. But perhaps that's my own generalization of how how people are looking at this.
Michael, can I suggest, I'm looking at the poll result. I mean, most people have actually voted. Okay. And maybe it'd be interesting to try and see if people are willing, if somebody from, as you were, each of these groupings is willing to kind of speak to why they've done, why they've decided not to apply. I don't know. I mean, or at least if when they speak, if they can, yeah.
Let's see how we get. Let's see how we go with anybody who wants to make a comment or a contribution, and if we can cover those categories that way. So looking across the tiles here, maybe Deborah, you might need to help me.
Yeah, I can't. Well, Myra Lawson, you are waving. I don't know if that is. So if you can unmute yourself, apparently. I don't know if you wanted to.
And then I can see, after Myra, I can see Judith Gordon and Paul Secker. So we'll come to the.
Okay, all right. Judith, do you want to unmute yourself then? Judith, there you go.
Okay, go ahead.
It's really with reference to what you just said about Austria. So if you're filling in the form, if you're going to go on this website, presumably with Austria, if we've written and been told it starts in September, that's not really pending either, is it? So does it apply?
Do you mean pending for the purpose of this poll?
Yes.
Well, technically, yes. It can't be pending until you've actually applied. I think it's just worth noting in the context of what's happening in the last, since June 2016.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suppose I would say if it's an imminent application that you're intending to put forward, then I would say it is in the pending category of.
Okay. And just for the quick question, how many countries allow more multiple nationalities?
Well, so as a general rule, I mean, I showed the table across the world, specifically in the European Union. My understanding is that 17 of the 27 place no restrictions on holding another nationality. The other 10 have variants of that, some of which include exceptions for reclaiming citizenship in the context of, such as in the context of Jews, and some of which have other sorts of allowances. For instance, as we know, Germany generally does not allow another nationality to be acquired voluntarily, except if it is another European Union nationality. It's part of the reason why there was such a push for people to acquire it before the end of transition. And as far as I'm aware, the German legislature hasn't amended the legislation to extend it beyond transition. But there are other trends. This is also a moving target, because places like Netherlands, the Liberal Party that is part of the coalition there, promised to change the legislation. I'm not I'm not sure whether that has already happened or is in the process of happening. So it's a complex picture, and it's part of, I think, what interests us to see to what extent that plays into people's considerations, because some people may still decide to pick up, I don't know, a Dutch nationality and give up their British nationality if they say have indefinite leave to remain here. I suspect most people would not want to give up their British nationality, so that would pose a very difficult dilemma to them. So, yeah.
Mm. Thank you.
Just before I ask Paul to ask his question, if anybody else wants to, please raise your hand now, and then whilst Paul's speaking, we can prepare to get you. Oh, I can see it. Paul, can you hear me? Paul Secker?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's two really. I mean, I think possibly the first one was caught by Judith's question, I'm not sure, but when I looked at the categories, I had to put myself into none of the above, although I've been very interested in this for some time, but I just simply haven't got round to applying yet. So, you know, it wasn't, the 4 categories didn't seem to apply to me. So I guess there's quite a lot of people who will put none of the above, but who are nevertheless extremely interested in the whole process. So I just thought I'd mention that. The second thing I wanted to say was on motivation, which I think is a particularly interesting challenge in a way, because in my own case, it was something I'd been considering even for quite some time before Brexit. And my motivation was really around the fact that Austria had been extremely ungenerous in compensating people at all for the fact that they had perhaps lost everything. And I saw it as a possibility of getting something which had been stolen, i.e. my father's citizenship and my right to that citizenship. But the motivation then changed on the night of Brexit, when my young adult kids phoned me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and who had none of the motivation that I had, but who said, you know, we've grown up as citizens of Europe. We want to retain it. Your dad was Austrian. Why don't you apply for Austrian citizenship so we can all be citizens of Europe? So my motivation in doing it suddenly became more for my kids than it was for myself. So I just point that out as being that motivations can be quite complex, even for the, you know, for one person.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about this project, because, in our opinion at least, because it's not limited to one or other age bracket. It flows through the generations. So grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as you indicated, are just as motivated, if not more so, but for different reasons, and we'd love to hear from them, either in their own right or from, you know, their parents or grandparents.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your presentations. It's very interesting, and I'll complete the survey.
Thank you.
you
Good
very
luck with
much.
your application.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for that. I can see Adam Rose, Simon Byrne, and a lady, V. Hassan Lambert. So let's come. I can see Simon had his hand up for a while. Simon Byrne.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Firstly, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. I did fill in the survey last week or the week before, so hopefully you've got my answer.
Thank you.
Myself and my 2 kids were 3 of the people from 2012 who got Article 116 German citizenship restored. The motivations were, at the time, I relate very much to what Paul said, in that I felt something of value had been stolen from my family, and I wanted it back. I think that was one thing. A second thing that was very important is the family on my father's side has a very long history in Germany. We've managed to trace some relatives back to the Weil rabbinic family and all the way back to Meyer of Rothenburg, who was in Rothenburg in the 1200s. So we had 800 years of history of being Jewish in Germany. On the other hand, there was the trauma of my father was a kinder transport. He left Germany aged 10 in 1939, and his parents were murdered. So there was balancing this 800 years of rich history against the horrific trauma that my father went through and the loss of my grandparents, and whether I wanted to get German citizenship back from that. So that was a big balancing act. In the end, my children were still minors at the time, so we decided to do it to give them possibly more opportunities in the future. We didn't know Brexit was coming. Boy, are we glad we did it. That has changed, and at the time, the German embassy was very helpful because there were so few people applying. That's not the case now, I believe. So just to sum up, so say thank you, and it's resonated a lot, and what other people have said has resonated a lot. I did have two questions. Whether you can answer them or not, I don't know. This Stag 14, I have a cousin through my dad's sister, who I think applied and was originally turned down because it was a mother who was German, not the father who was German. And at that time they said, you're not eligible because it went through your mother. Is that changed under the Stag 14 rules? Should she apply again? And the second question is, my wife, who's descended from her grandparents were Romanian. Do you know anything about how Romania deals with this or not?
I mean, the truth of the matter is I can't give you a qualified answer to either of these. I mean, there might be other people on the call who are more qualified to do that. I mean, might be able to get in touch, as I say, with maybe the exclusion group on your first question. We don't sadly possess that expertise, so apologies.
I can't say anything about Romania. I'm sorry, but
Okay.
but it may be that I mean, as we said at the outset, whilst we there will be so many different stories hopefully coming out of this project, and stories via Romania or other parts of the Balkans or Southeast Europe. It'll be fascinating to hear them too.
I mean, again, we said at the beginning this was not going to be advice. I would take things that are said here with, well, as guidance rather than advice. An obvious place to start with any of this, of course, is the embassies, the consulates. I can only just to add, in the case of Romanians, just because I know this was my wife was doing it. He was from Romania, and he had to go back and to recover certain documents, but I think that's a standard thing. It's dependent on the documents and whatever the prevailing application is. As far as the Stag 14 application is concerned, it should be, I mean, this is the guide, this is what we've worked with the embassies, that where somebody would be ineligible under 116, the application would automatically be converted to a Stag 14, so that because there's a natural exclusion under the, well, not natural, where there's a legal restriction, then it can be converted to the Stag 14. It should be automatic process. I'm conscious of time, as ever with these things. Adam Rose, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, it was probably more an observation than a question, but picking up on the Sephardi, the Portuguese and Spanish roots, where I discovered 2 years ago that I had Sephardi roots that I had no idea about. That you realise how short a generation, well, how quickly you move from one country to another. So my family turned up in the UK in the 1730s, which was only 7 generations ago. So that's my grandmother's great-grandparents. And I can think I knew my great-grandparents, so it's not that far to their grandparents, effectively. These were family who had turned up after 1 generation in Amsterdam and before that in Spain and Portugal. And I am going through the process of seeking Portuguese nationality at the moment. It's a very lengthy process of proving by tracking birth certificates and marriage certificates all the way back. I got the Portuguese, the Jewish community in Lisbon to certify. They made a spelling mistake in the form, and I'm back almost to square one as a result of their spelling mistake. But I'm persevering still, and hope that by the time that my great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren are around, they'll be able to find some Portuguese passports.
Well, that's positive thinking.
It's an incredible experience, and I'm doing it really, to answer the other question, just because I think it's so historically fascinating to be able to reconnect with people who I had never heard of until 2 years ago, when I found my great-great-great-grandfather's Bris certificate in Bevis Marks.
Wow, amazing stuff.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Adam, and good that we've at least tried to balance this a little bit from the Sephardi with the Ashkenaz. Maybe it may be 1 out of 150, but at least we've done it. I'm sorry, I don't know your first name, but I can see on the screen it says V. Hassan Lambert. What's your name, if I may ask?
Vivian.
Vivian. I was going to guess, but okay, go ahead.
Hi. Simon, do you have a Dance bookstore behind you?
Yeah, I stole a photo from online from the
Very nice. I recognize it. So my background is that my mother and my grandparents are all from Slovakia, which was my grandfather. It was Hungary, then it became Czechoslovakia, and then it became Slovakia. So that's very confusing about where you're supposed to go. If they were Czechoslovakian, there's no Czechoslovakia.
Well, yeah, I have a Czech passport because my grandparents were resident in Prague, and therefore Prague is now the Czech Republic rather than the Slovak Republic.
Yeah. So that's all confusing. And what I wanted to know, I know we're not supposed to ask for personal advice, but I just wanted to know if you had any advice about, is there any kind of general group that helps people? The person who had
the AJR.
But who do I contact at AJR?
Michael Newman.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Michael, I'll be in touch. Thank you.
I know a lawyer whose name is Simon Albert. He's very helpful with these.
Back and forth. Huh?
Yeah. I wouldn't do that. Well, look, whatever inquiries we get, we try to help. I mean, there are other. I mean, Paul, who was on earlier, is from another group that we work closely with, the descendants from the Kitchener group, and there are colleagues I can see from across the community here. So where we can, I'm sure this won't be the first person applying for this. There's always someone who's done something like this before.
Okay, I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay, so I can see Rita, and I can see Helen Levy. So Rita, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Can
you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. Above all, from my point of view, I can understand the points that were made, and you have helped me to make my decision now about my parents were Austrian, as were my husband's, and you've helped me make my decision that I will apply, the basis being that they've taken something that's really rightfully mine. So my parents obviously were kicked out and so on, and they took a lot from them, and a lot of the family and so on went. So I thank you for that, and I will apply, and it looks like September is the time. The Austrians are just, in my experience, the Austrians are just not as compliant and as nice to deal with as the Germans on the whole have been, if nice is the right word. They're difficult, and they have been notoriously difficult, I think. But maybe I'll be...
I believe we have someone from the Austrian embassy potentially on the call, so you might want to tell him.
Go ahead. I'd be interested to hear what they have to say.
Perhaps we should qualify that that's Rita's personal view, and
yes, it is my view only.
Dissociate ourselves from any personal views, as we do with our letters in the AJR journal. But okay, well, on a serious level, I think if it's bringing awareness and helping people to make decisions, then all the better.
Wonderful.
And please do our questionnaire as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think we're making it conditional that people should fill in the questionnaire alongside this. You're already filling in forms. I think we've got time for maybe a couple more. Yeah. I can see virtually Helen Levy has raised her hand, but I can't see her tile, I'm afraid. So Helen, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. I can see one or two waving to you, but we are going to struggle with time. Let's just see how we go. Helen, can you hear me, or can you unmute yourself?
I think, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to answer on the motivation, I agree with people. I feel that really strongly that something was taken from me. It took me a really long time to decide about whether to apply or not. But combined with my fear of the rise of anti-Semitism, my kids were absolutely adamant that I had to apply. So we put in a family application, but it really was spurred on by my kids. In response to someone's question about it going through the mother, I'm actually applying through my mother. My mother came here on the kinder transport as well, so she came as a child. I was told by the German embassy that I could apply, but my sister, who's older than me, couldn't apply. Although that might have changed because I hadn't heard anything about the Stag 14. But it was to do with when your mother was born, because it used to be that German nationality only went through the father, and then German law changed and it went through the mother. And so if you were born when the German law changed, then you could go through your mother. But I suspect that now that's actually covered by the Stag 14 for those it doesn't apply to. Another thing is that the German embassy told me, because I was concerned about, I mean, our applications have been in for nearly 2 years now, and we're still waiting to hear. But I checked whether or not post-Brexit we would have to make a choice between British and German, and I was told that no, we wouldn't. We would still be able to get both. So that's my contribution.
That's not in law yet. I mean, if that becomes the case,
from the German side, they won't be asking.
Yeah,
German
that was what the German embassy told me in writing. So
a naturalization under Article 116 or under Stag 14 don't require you to give up British citizenship. It's just
general.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right,
thank you very much, Helen. Let's see how we go quickly with time. If you could keep your comments as brief as you can. The next one is, I'm saying again, I'm sorry, I don't know the name, but it says JH's iPad. Is there a JH? You might have to prove these are your initials.
It's me. Hi, it's Jude. Jude Black speaking.
Hello, Jude.
Hi. It's just a quick question. Thank you very much for all your information. I did try and claim German citizenship for myself and my children, but found out that in the course of my inquiries with the German embassy, that because our mother and grandparents were stateless, our mother was on the kinder transport and arrived stateless as a refugee, we can't claim for any other nationality. Is that correct? And will the new regulations change this? Her parents were moved from Lodz in Poland to Germany, and so she and her sisters were born in Essen, Germany, but it seems that they were stateless. Can one do anything, progress anything with that kind of status or not, even though she was born in Germany?
Ruby, Simon, anything to add? I think it might be if you want to send an email separately. We can see about that.
The only observation
the only thing I would say is where there are people who have applied, just being born in Germany does not constitute, obviously to say, does not constitute being a German national, and we see this quite a bit. But there may be ways around this. It may be that there is some Polish citizenship that can be recovered somehow, if the aim is to achieve EU. Let's take that one. Okay, let's take that one offline. And then again, I don't know the name, but it says CHMALN. That's the name of the person.
Yeah. Okay, you've got me. Andrew Milton, I remember we've met. Michael. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't see your tile. Hang on.
Right. Yeah, I'm there, definitely. I'll speak anyway.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead. Briefly, if you can.
Very quickly, my father's family came over in the 30s as refugees from Berlin. We had very close associations with Germany after the war, and we traveled there frequently. And my working life, I've been working with all Europeans. So when Brexit came, it was like a bereavement. So I applied immediately through Article 116, including my sister, my daughters, and my 3 grandchildren. And they all received it through Julian Bush at the embassy. It took a year and a half. I have to say, I was very impressed by the efficiency of the German embassy. And what surprised me is the hostility I've received from other members of the community. As you know very well, Michael, when I talked at the synagogue in Leeds, there were two people who were very, very almost offensive, saying, how could you? I'm sorry, I regard my nationality as three: UK, German, and also Jewish, strongly Jewish. So I have the three loyalties. And I don't think any country should be demonized, actually. And as you can see, I've written in the AJR, and I received very hostile replies, and I replied to them. So what I want to say very firstly is that I am so enamored by this meeting, and there's such a big movement now. And I'm sorry, I was kind of almost feeling like a pariah until I've been to this meeting. So I will participate as much as I can. I've also been involved in a lot of interviews with different countries, and I had an interview published in Dutch newspaper and everything. Thanks to Michael, he put me on to them. But what I want to ask you is that all our family are now Germans. I always use my passport. I've lost a lot of loyalty, actually, to Britain since this Brexit. I used to be very proudly British, but I'm not. And I run EU projects, so I'm very closely connected with the EU. But it's my wife, whose mother was originally German, whose grandmother was German, but she married an Austrian, a Jewish guy called Lervy originally, and she must have assumed his nationality on marriage. But my wife's mother was born in Germany, they lived in Berlin, and they were forced to flee. So I wondered whether the best place was to apply for her citizenship through Austria or through the German embassy. Her grandmother must have subsumed Austrian citizenship on marrying her husband, although they lived in Berlin. So I don't know if anyone can answer that.
I think.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question. I think just because I want to give Simon and Ruby a quick chance to say any final words, and we've got to wrap it up. I'm sorry for all those who've had their hand up, but we can't get to everybody with time has beaten us. Yeah. I think the best way to deal with that is to send as I said, an inquiry in to us at AJR, and we'll see if we can best help. Simon, Ruby, is there anything you would like to say?
Well,
conclusion?
Just following on, thank you very much, Michael, and just following on from what the gentleman just said in his observations, from the official data that we've seen from the German embassy, and I don't want to just single out Germany as one country. I mean, we know that there are 26 further countries. We know that within and across the Jewish community in this country, many thousands of people appear to be taking these steps. So for anyone to feel awkward about doing so, or to experience hostility for doing so, well, there are lots of us doing it. And like the old gag about Jews are just like everyone else, except more so, we know that hundreds of thousands of British people in mainland Britain are seeking out Irish nationality via the Irish diaspora, quite apart from Northern Ireland. So we're just doing the same as everyone else, except more so, because our experience is very different and in some senses rather more extreme. So there's a very particular Jewish experience here to talk about, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to speak about it here to the AJR, to the audience, and rest assured that you're all in very good company, and we very much look forward to hearing from you further.
Thank you, Simon. Ruby?
Yeah, so just to add to that, to echo everything that Simon's just said, to remind people just of the website address. So we will also, I believe, so JSHE, passport system. I believe there will also be an email sent out to to all those who have registered. It will include that information. I also believe the video from this event will ultimately be made available on the site. So by all means, if you know people who will be interested in what we've just discussed but weren't able to be on the call, please do share that video link with them. If when you run through the questionnaire, and I hope many of you will now fill it, do feel free. I mean, it does have my email there at university, so I'd be delighted to hear from you. As I said, not so much on specific advice on how to apply, because I have very little qualification in that, but on the issues that the project is interested in, and as you so eloquently in your contributions have highlighted. So it was actually quite moving to hear from people who've been persuaded to go ahead as a result of this meeting, or now feel that they are in good company, that is, to be fair, also part of the wider agenda or the wider narrative. So just a final thanks from me again to the AJR team for supporting us through this. We really do appreciate all of your help.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for leading this fantastic initiative and really fascinating project, very personal level. You mentioned the team. I should have at the beginning, but I'm going to thank them now. I have got two colleagues on the call with us, Susan Howard and Deborah Barnes. Deborah, who's been, both been co-hosting, Deborah and Susan, who do a lot of the Zoom events that we are putting on at the moment, which you are all also very welcome. I think also just you say it's good for you. I hope that out of this people will complete the questionnaire and you get a lot more numbers to boost the statistics for you. You're certainly the best brand themed dress presenters that we've had on the Zoom event to date, with t-shirts. That's something for future presenters to think about. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you all at a future event. Yes, well, Simon, you've outdone yourselves, really. You've outdone yourselves. So we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you very much for coming along today, and safe journeys home. See you soon. Bye now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.